For our next feature, we'll be visiting the stunning Bantry House.
Built in the early 1700s, Bantry House has been home to the White family since the early 1760s. In 1946, Clodagh and Geoffrey Shelswell-White opened its doors to the public, and it has since been operated as a visitor centre, bed and breakfast and film location. Sophie Shelswell-White now manages the estate and is going to take us on a tour of the house that she calls home.
This section of the house we're standing in now is the oldest part of the house. It's been in my family, the White family, since the 1730s. And then this small house, it was a Queen Anne style house, just this square area here, and the anteroom was for sale. So then my family bought it. Moved in 1769, roughly. And I suppose that's the special thing, that we've been living in the house since that date. So all the portraits we have in the hall are all of my ancestors. All of the content that we have in the house was brought here in the mid-1800s and has been here since as well. Richard White bought the house 1730s, moved his family in 1760s, and then his grandson into the late 1700s became the first Baron of Bantry. He got his title of Baron 1797, and the reason for that was that he showed his loyalty. So Ireland was ruled by Britain at the time. An Irishman had gone to France, had collected a fleet of ships, and they were going to sail around Ireland, land in Bantry Bay, and then help the Irish people rebel against British rule. My ancestor had been told that they were coming. They were going to jump off the ships and use his land. So he was ready to defend his own land. So he got his tenants together and his staff, and they were going to fight the French. Turned out the French never had to land in the end anyway, because the weather was so bad. But I suppose for showing that loyalty, he was given his peerage of Baron. And this is his crown from being a Baron. And his son, who was also Richard, decided to go to Europe to travel a lot. He had married very well into the O'Brien family at Dromoland Castle. A lot of money came with Mary O'Brien, with his wife, so they could spend all of their time travelling to Europe and sending back all of the content that we have in the house, and sending back the second Earl or the Viscount's vision for how he would enlarge the house and how he would turn the lawns outside into this formal garden. So his poor father then had to watch all of this going on and had to take all the delivery consignments and all that kind of stuff. So he was getting a bit sick of that, and by the end of it he had to move himself out to Glengarry. He couldn't watch all of this happening. You feel very connected having all of this around you. And apparently as a child, if I was crying in the middle of the night, my mum just couldn't cope anymore. She would give me over to Dad, and he would come downstairs and walk me around the ancestors, and eventually I'd fall asleep apparently. So I've always had, bizarrely, that was Dad's little trick in the night time, to walk us downstairs and try and calm us down and give Mum a bit of time to sleep. So, you know, your life is whatever your life is, and home is whatever you've grown up in. So for us this was just normality, really. And I was never embarrassed talking about it, but it wasn't something I wouldn't walk into a room and say, "Hi, I'm Sophie and I'm from this big house in Southern Ireland." You know, it wasn't like that either, but I was always proud to show it off once it came up properly in conversation, yeah. So Clodagh, my grandmother, had married Geoffrey Shelswell, and after the war in 1946, she decided to open the house up. First house in Ireland to be open to the public. She understood the need, we needed to bring in more income for all the maintenance of the estate. And she got a couple of hundred visitors a season, I think. My first cousins actually remember as children standing on the desk, and they were given like a penny for every 100 visitors they let in or something like that. But I never knew her. She died in 1978 and I was born a couple of years after that. She had two daughters, my aunts Dee and Una, and then my father in 1933. So once he was born, they held everything in trust for him. And as a hobby, he liked to play the trombone. And he started the Bantry Brass Band. So as I said earlier, with the house being a smaller house, this was then an addition in the early 1800s. And they're furnished mainly from the Petit Trianon in Versailles, so the Palace of Versailles. Tapestries, carpet, and most of the furniture, even the fireplaces as well. So fine examples of the second Earl, of his travels to Europe, what he was sending back and bringing back with them. As well as that then, the chandelier in the middle here, this is Irish crystal. And these rooms then would have been used for the ladies generally. They would withdraw in here after dinner, so that's why they're drawing rooms. And then this table is really interesting actually, Judy. This is a rent table, so it's where the landlord, or in our case when we were a large landowning family, our agent would meet with tenants. to renew leases or pay the rent. And so each drawer would be locked and would have the lease agreement, map, any notes or whatever of that tenant in that drawer. And then as they met, the tenant would put the money into the drawer and the table swivels around to meet the landlord on the other side. So that's a nice piece. An unusual shape, the octagonal shape, you wouldn't necessarily always have that shape. So we'll go into the little anteroom and then the large dining room. The little anteroom is so special because it has the wallpaper from the 19th century and the ceiling is so lovely. And if I ever get asked my favourite room, funnily enough, this is my favourite room, and in a way it's the least kind of impressive. But as a child, I wouldn't have known about the wallpaper particularly, but I always just liked this room. I think I love the stars on the ceiling. They're always the thing for me. So we'll go into the dining room. This room my grandmother would have had painted in this kind of bright blue. The portraits here at the back, King George III and Queen Charlotte, and King George III gave my ancestor his title, so he would have gifted these portraits as well. And the elaborate frames and the back sideboard were made locally to tie in with the ones around the side of the room here, which are German. They're actually wine bins. These are all wine bins. So they're all hinged, they lift up, and wine can be stored in them. These houses were built originally to be shown off, to have lots of visitors in them. You know, there was a huge staff at the time as well. And I joke, the only thing different now is that I charge people, whereas before it was just the family home or whatever. Now we still live in the house, we live upstairs, above, funnily enough, above these rooms. And we actually have weddings in here now as well. If you believe it, the dancing and music and stuff goes on down here. And dinner can be up in the library. So they have always been used. We just use them slightly differently, maybe to how originally they were meant to be used. We had a large movie here, made here, called Moll Flanders a number of years ago now. Again, I was maybe 13, 14, and Morgan Freeman was here. So I've met Morgan Freeman. And I've met Robin Wright. You know, she's in House of Cards now, the wife. So she was here as well, and lots of Irish actors. But Morgan Freeman, even then, I think it was just after Shawshank, or he was already massive then, and so that when we played with his grandkids, he had his family with him for the couple of weeks, and he's like an honorary member of the Bantry Sailing Club, and you know, so that was really special. So I would say he's probably, you couldn't get better than Morgan Freeman ultimately, yeah. We'll have a look at the ladies' room. So all of these rooms would have been used up until my great-grandparents' time. And they look out over these magnificent views over the bay. Once my grandmother opened the house to the public then, she stopped using all of these rooms and we retained the apartment, which is where we live now. If you can imagine, we'll go back to the 1870s because it seems to be the most important time for the house. We were the largest landowners in Cork, so we had land around the house. We did lots of building in Bantry, and then we had a lot of land out the Barrett Peninsula as well. So we owned the copper mines in Alhuse and we rented them out to the Puxley family. Glengariff, we had our hunting lodge in the woods in Glengariff. Now over the years, land was sold off, just like some content had to be sold off, and that is just fact. It happens. If we want to try and keep the whole place, there has to be some compromises somewhere along the way. We have a long list of works we'd like to do, but we tend to get to the things that are most urgent. We've noticed the last winter it's been so wet. It was such a wet winter that we had damp coming into places we thought were completely clear of damp. Just such an incredible amount of rain. So damp is more of a problem for us now than it even was 12 months ago. And it really is, it tends to be the things that are most urgent we deal with first. The beautiful library, largest room of the house, links the two wings. So the west wing, which would have been staff accommodation, female, I think in the west, and gentlemen staff accommodation in the east wing. Now it's tea room and bed and breakfast. And it faces out over this beautiful wisteria circle and the 100 steps, and the terraces as well. In the garden, we're doing a big clearing of the terraces. So on the 100 steps, for the next 3 years, we'll be clearing them and reintroducing balustrading on them as well. That's a big job, and that's a really positive job. That's something that should be happening more often. And thankfully we're getting to a point where we can do those projects every year now. But it is, like, it's a cliche, but it is a marathon, not a sprint. Often people come and they say, God, I don't envy you the task, or, you know, or do you know what you should do? They're doing this in such and such a place, maybe you should do it here. I'd like people to go there and say, do you know what they're doing in Bantry? It's unbelievable. So that's my aim.
We hope that you enjoyed that fascinating tour of Bantry House. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for in this week's show. But if you'd like to get in touch with us with a story or event that you'd like us to cover, you can email us at cork@irishtv.ie and keep in touch with us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks a million for watching, and we'll see you next week.